I'm very pleased to be here today again. As Christian said, I'm Mattia. I'm working at the Italian Institute of Technology at Center for Future and Sustainable Technologies, and I'm a member of Carbon Group hosted by Politecnico of Turin. Our research group was born as a carbon research group devoted to unconventional materials such as carbon nanotubes, graphene, and related materials. But since 2008, at least for the last 10 years, we have started to move on to different carbon sources. Here you can see the members, the head, Prof. Alberto Tagliaferro, Prof. Mauro Gercelli, the other my colleague, Pravin Jagdale, and myself. We start to move from nanostructured materials to biochar basically because we were aware about the sustainability issue, but we did not want to compromise with the properties. So after the first test with the electrochemical systems, it was our first paper on the topic, we chose to start our new research line fully dedicated on biochar. So what we are going to see in this presentation, a very brief introduction about the use of biochar for production of electronic materials, and a couple of in-house applications that we developed using biochar-derived materials, one for batteries and one for a fuel cell, using respectively cotton fibers and waste tea. So, as a very, very first point, the good properties of any electronic materials. The very first one is the conductivity. If you think to an electronic material, in particular, we are talking about anodes, so those that are produced with commonly carbon materials such as activated carbon, carbon replicas, CNTs, carbon paper, they all are conductive, handleable, stable in the potential window used during the process, and generally with high surface area. Those materials, of course, could be engineered by increase the surface area again, or by insert some functionalities or some iterators, just to boost the properties of the material itself. And biochar can meet practically all the properties of a good electronic material, with the exception of low surface area, but it can add an improvement of sustainability compared to the other carbon sources available, even if it is compared with expanded graphite. So, our very first approach for what concerned batteries and more specific with the sodium batteries was to enhance the surface area of biochar, because at least for sodium-ion batteries, that was one of the topics that disgracefully I will not show today because it's a work in process, but just a brief discussion about. It was necessary not only a good carbon, but also a carbon that display an appropriate porous distribution that could be achieved by simple activation with CO2, or how we developed with sodium hydroxide or with sodium carbonate. These disassemble the very tightly compact graphitic domains and allow to the intercalation process and the diffusion process of ions inside. And it will be interesting for a topic that you are going to see in the next slides, that is concerning the development of lithium-ion batteries. So this is the first thing that we did to improve the electronic capacity of biochar, plain biochar. The other one was insert some heteroatoms inside. The most common heteroatoms used to boost the electrochemical activities of biochar in general of carbon materials is nitrogen. There are plenty of approaches to insert nitrogen inside the carbon scaffold. We choose one that was a good compromise between the kind of functionalities inside and the endability. We use urea. Urea is practically very common and cheap all around the world. And interestingly, it starts to decompose at 130 degrees, more or less, 135, producing some radicals as those you can see here that promote the insertion of nitrogen inside the aromatic scaffolds, producing pyrrolic, pyridinic, graphitic, and amino decoration inside. All of them could enhance electrochemical properties in different ways. For example, they can stabilize the catalyst for fuel cells, or they can promote the insertion mechanisms. Sorry. So let's start with batteries. The work that I'm talking about in the next few slides was run with the collaboration of Game Lab, also hosted by Politecnico of Turin. Game Lab is the group of applied materials and electrochemistry. It was run under the supervision of one of my colleagues, Pravin Jagdale, and it was based on the simple idea that some biomasses could be directly converted into electrodes without the need to disperse them into a filter, into a binder. So we start to think about one of the most available textiles that is based on biomass, cotton, waste cotton in particular. And we used it in this study to produce electronic material, anodic material in particular, for lithium-ion batteries, aiming to produce a self-standing electrode by simply pyrolyze the cotton textile and use as it is. And as you can see, it's a very interesting approach because it just skips one part of the electron production and it is assembled in some way expanded graphite. Also, cotton shows another interesting property. So it's composed practically by only cellulose and cellulose fibers, and that could lead to the production of a carbon that is an intermediate between hard and soft carbon. And soft carbon is the most appropriate material for the production of anodic electrode for lithium-ion batteries. So this is the material that we realized. Simple pyrolysis in Earth atmosphere under nitrogen at 1000 degrees in this case. Sorry, not at 1000, but 800 degrees, because we observed that at 1000 degrees conductivity improved, but the mechanical strength of the fibers decreased drastically. So if we gain something like electronic density, and current density on the electrode, but we lost the possibility to produce a self-standing electrode, we were not happy about. But anyway, as you can see from the picture B, realized with an optical microscopy, you can see that the textile itself remains practically untouched. Only at a micrometric scale, it is appreciable how carbon produced from waste cotton change after pyrolysis. Some fibers are hollow, some are just displaced, and so on. And as you can see from the picture captured at TEM, the carbon is laying between an hard and soft carbon. So we just start a preliminary study by grinding and disperse the cotton fibers after pyrolysis and test it in a lithium metal cell. We did it just to be sure that the material as it is could be used for these applications. And the results were very promising. As you can see from the cyclic voltammetry reported on the left of the slide, the insertion and the insertion produce a very sharp peak. And the specific capacity, cycle after cycle, testing current from 20 amperes up to 20 coulomb up to 1, was quite good. It started at 450, and it's a very relevant result, and it's quite stable. The Coulombic efficiency is close to 97% after more or less 400 cycles. And this is the start. So after producing an ink with fibers, we just start to evaluate the possibility to use just a piece of pyrolyzed textile as it is. And the results were very, very interesting, because even if specific capacity was reduced, the material still active. So just figure it out. A piece of waste cotton pyrolyzed, and the biochar produced in this way was used directly, as it is, for the production of an electrode able to reach current around 120 milliampere per gram. It was very promising for a sustainable approach to batteries based on biochar. Moving on, another thing that we observe is that in this case, pyrolysis was not so simple as we thought in the very first place. Cotton fibers pyrolyze with a temperature gradient, even if they are very tiny. As you can see here, the more organized layers are on the top side of the fibers, and there lithium was accumulated cycle after cycle, as was proved by TEM analysis that you can see here. Anyway, apart from the particularity about the pyrolysis of cotton fibers, what I'd like to stress is that it's possible to convert a waste textile in a carbon textile that is able to promote insertion and the insertion of lithium ions. This was the first example of it. So, moving from batteries to fuel cells, just a brief introduction about fuel cell. Generally, there is a lot of attention on batteries, the few on fuel cells, even if now it's rising year after year. Fuel cell is basically an electrochemical device that was able to store energy and convert a fuel, a general fuel, into electricity. We studied the methanol direct fuel cell in alkaline conditions with an alkaline ion exchange membrane. And generally, those devices are based on platinum electrodes and platinum groups metals. The main issue, as you can figure it out, is the high cost of the electrodes. So we try to replace platinum with something more cheap, like iron, for example. And at the same time, we try to figure it out how to replace not only the metal, but also the support of the metal, moving from pure graphite, electrochemical grade graphite, to something more sustainable as biochar. For this study, we choose a T biochar, produce a very high temperature in this case. We also, with the collaboration of Green Energy Group, also hosted from Politecnico of Turin, we choose to use an iron precursor like phthalocyanine to insert it as it is into the carbon produced from pyrolysis of T. So this is the plain carbon. As you can see, it's very channeled. There are some nanostructures on the channel that are produced during the release of volatile organic compounds during pyrolysis. And this material was very conductive, as we proved in a previous study where we mix it with the plastic materials. But not enough. The conductivity that was needed to boost the performance was far, far lower than what we expected. So we annealed it based on the metallurgic process, basically, because we use a metallurgic oven to anneal heat till 1500 degrees, and the material that we produce matching the properties that we need. So, thus started with this material and some functionalization. We insert the iron sites by simple ball milling. It was cheap and easy to replicate test after test. And after, we also modify the biochar with the methodology that you saw before in the very, very first slides. So by activating it with CO2 or by activating it with urea and modifying it with urea, of course. So the first thing that we observed was an increment of surface area moving from a simple T produced as it is to the activated ones, even if the surface area was lower compared to commercial carbon black. But anyway, and the pore volume and the pore distribution was particularly interesting because we just laid in between micro and mesoporous carbons. It was we wanted to study. And from XPS, we also interestingly see that after the insertion of tyrosine with iron, the distribution of nitrogen species is affected by the activation process that we used. So if we use an activation based on carbon dioxide, we enhance the presence of pyrrolic nitrogens. Even in contrary, if we use urea, we increase dramatically the pyridinic ones, stabilize a lot the iron 2, that is the metal active site that we need. So, electrochemical properties. We compared it with a platinum-rich carbon electrode, and as you can see, the onset and half-wave potential were practically the same, even if the activity of platinum was far higher. Nevertheless, as you can see, the metal tolerance of the biochar decorated with iron after the activation with CO2 and urea was higher compared to the platinum one. So it tolerated a lot of more methanol without leaching metals, without leaching activities. It's quite interesting because if you think to a very tough and stable system, you need these properties. And we proved also it by the durability test. If you think about these, after 4,500 cycles of charge-discharge, the T-based electrode after the activation of CO2 was practically the same. It lost around 10% of the activity, while the platinum one lost up to the 80%. So both iron and urea T were quite comparable, and they prove the soundness of this approach for producing a reliable fuel cell materials. In particular, we can replace platinum group metals with iron, and we can replace an expensive carbon replica or expensive graphene electrode or electrochemical grade graphite with very conductive biochar produced from waste. So, as I promise, I've been very quick. With this presentation, I do not want to overview all the field of the use of biochar in the electrochemical system is very wide. Is start with just simply supercup, moving from all kind of batteries, driving to fuel cells of different types. But I'd like to point it out that unconventional approach, like the production of self-standing electrode by using waste textiles, the insertion of single atoms like the one that you saw for fuel cells, can open unreached ways to produce sustainable materials with comparable or better performance than the one that are now available. Before ending, I'd like to remember one of our colleagues that recently passed away, was one of the founders of Carbon Group, Massimo Rovere, was our Raman specialist. He was there when we started to work with biochar, and he's not here anymore, but we'd like to remember him. So if you have any questions, I'm ready to answer as my best. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mattia. Really interesting stuff you're working on. So we are open for questions. Either raise your hand or ask the question directly. My first question would be, so you said that the cotton pyrolysis was not homogeneous. So the
Yep.
what kind of pyrolysis did you do, or what kind of reactor?
In this case, we use a tubular reactor with a laminar flux of nitrogen because we just insert a support with on the top the carbon because we need to preserve it. So without any mixing, without any strong heating rate, we just work very slow, 10 degrees per minute, 15 degrees per minute, sorry, and a steady state at a higher temperature of 30 minutes. It's impossible for this kind of study using a mixing process because you are going to destroy the fibers. We use something like that for producing small cotton fibers for producing composites, but in this case was just done in this way. What I meant when I said that was weird is that the more graphitized material was of the outside, but when I say outside, I meant just few micrometers of the fibers. So this is what I meant when I said inhomogeneous, not on so large scale to be appreciable otherwise that from electrochemical approach.
Yeah, I just wanted to say we could do a microwave pyrolysis if that would have been a real issue, as a suggestion maybe. Then you got a chat from a chat question. If I find it from Paul Anderson. Is the length of the cotton fibers an important characteristic? If so, have you tried the fibers of industrial hemp or other fibers actually?
Okay, for the first part of the question, yes. The length of the fibers is strictly related to the mechanical properties of the electrode that you are going to produce. Short fibers are not so performing from a mechanical point of view. You need something that just displays the stress occurring to the electrode. That was the main point in using long fibers. And yes, we use M fibers. We are working now with that, so I don't have some finalized data to show, but yes, of course, we work on that. Just with the M fiber, we started 3 months ago.
And then a question from Heberling. How do you activate urea in slide 7? I'm not sure what was on slide 7.
On small scale, as we worked, we just preheat the oven and put the reactor inside the oven. Because if you just heat urea mixed with biomass, as it is, urea decomposes at lower temperature, and the insertion of nitrogen was not so effective. So on small scale, as we work with, we just preheat the oven, seal a metal cylinder with our biomass, put everything inside, and just wait. If you think to do the same process on a different scale, maybe not on a simple tubular reactor, what I can think about is just insert urea, melting urea, or a solution of urea inside the reactor where it reached the temperature with a spray pyrolysis, basically. But in that case, probably you need a bubbling bed reactor. But just a very, very rough hypothesis.
And then you got another question from Ewer. Can you tell us how well and what is the areal capacitance of the electrode material you prepared?
For cotton was a little bit tricky to estimate because we didn't run chronoamperometric measurements on that. We did some chronoamperometric measurements for the active area of fuel cell. I didn't remember that, so sorry. But you can check for it on the paper that I use as reference. Just went out on the website a month ago. If I remember correctly, the active surface area of the electrode was far lower than the one that measured with BET. But again, I don't want to misjudge about this point. Just check the paper.
Okay, great. I think that's one of the few times that we are actually within the time frame. You just got a last question here.
Enough to be tested.
Is the material robust? Yeah, enough.
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you again, Mattia, for your presentation. And anyone who is looking for the paper title or anything else that was within the presentation will be online in the next couple of days on our website. So you can click through that again. Okay. And our next Green Carbon webinar will be on the 7th of April with one presentation about the scaling up biochar production and the second one about activated carbon production. Yeah, thank you very much.